Peace be upon you and welcome to Way Stations. My name is Rehan Khan. This is the show where we talk about what does it mean to be human in the modern age. And as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Waleed Mossad. Dr. Waleed, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. And how are you? How's everything?
I'm very well. And I think we have a very exciting show today because we have many things that we've been speaking about for several months. I think it's going to be coalescing with our with our guest speaker today. I certainly feel that.
Yeah, I'm quite excited. I think the themes we've been looking at of kind of how to reintroduce or reinvigorate perhaps some traditional practices. I think the speaker today, our guest, is the first one where maybe we're looking at it from a much more physical aspect. So that's very interesting to me. So.
Yeah, exactly. Great. Well, let's not keep the listeners guessing too much more. We're very, very blessed that we have with us today Mikhail Abdul-Latif, and he's written a book called The Tao of War. You could say Tao, T-A-O. You could say Tao. I think he'll say Tao, but whatever your preference is, you could say that. And he himself is an author, a poet, a musician, a lifelong martial artist from Seattle, Washington. And he holds a national wrestling titles in both Canada and the US, as well as a black belt in Jiu-Jitsu. He spent many years traveling the world as a professional athlete, whilst he's also been studying with various masters of the martial arts, as well as the spiritual traditions as well. He's an instructor and educator, and he really helps his students to integrate the philosophical, the practical, the artistic, and the spiritual aspects of the martial arts. And when I first met him last year, I remember he said that he'd written a book very much for his students, but it's had quite an appeal. So, Mikhail Abdul-Latif, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here.
Great. Lovely to have you. So let's get going a little bit because I've done a bit of an introduction for you. And as I said, you're known as an author, as a poet, as a musician, as a lifelong martial artist. But can you tell us a little bit about your own kind of backstory, like, maybe, where you grew up, your formative years, and what led you onto this path?
Yeah, as you mentioned, I told you when we met in person that I wrote this book for my students, and I mean that quite literally. I found myself in a position of teaching martial arts, and the normative practice of teaching martial arts right now is basically a commercial transaction. Mostly you have gyms that are either funded by the government, perhaps, if you're talking about, the post-Soviet countries. They might have like boxing or wrestling or judo, and it's just a government institution. Or if you're on a national team for, wrestling in Iran or Japan or even the United States, it's going to be paid for. But other than that, it's a commercial transaction. So you have people going to a gym, and the gym is a business. So there's a business owner trying to make a salary, and then he has employees, and they're teaching martial arts. And the absurdity of this kind of struck me after several years into, being an instructor. And I realized it's just not appropriate to teach someone something which has really a sacred essence for only a commercial interest. You can't take the sacred and, turn it into the completely profane. It's like turning a synagogue into a nightclub. So you're doing a disservice to your students in that you're not even, through your actions, explaining them the profundity of what you're actually doing. So it's through the inaction of giving a philosophical, a spiritual, a cosmological education that can be coupled with the physical education of martial arts. By its absence, you're sort of conveying that is what it is. So that started to, eat at me. And I realized, okay, I need to start incorporating more things into my, you could say pedagogy of martial arts. And I'm looking around, you've got some classical literature on martial arts. You've got some things from Japan, the Book of Five Rings from the very famous samurai Miyamoto Musashi. You've got perhaps the Tao Te Ching. You've got books from the Islamic tradition on Futuha. But really, in terms of where we are right now, nothing was really appropriate. Nothing really serves the need of a martial arts student right now, navigating where we are in time, where we are in, perhaps you could say, modernity. It's a very confusing time. And so I looked at the lack of available resources and I was like, okay, I'm going to write the book. And I was in a pretty good position to write the book on this because, as you were suggesting earlier, like, how did I even get into martial arts? I had a really, I should say, fortuitous and perhaps, a providential hand in my martial art upbringing, because I was able to have a variety of martial art educations that usually don't overlap. So my dad, he put me into martial arts. I was probably like 3 or 4. So it's a fuzzy memory. I don't remember it very well, but I was young enough to like not have clear memories, if that makes sense. I might have been 5, but I probably wasn't 7. You're still not like talking properly and you got the little uniform. It was karate and it was a friend of his. And then it just stayed like that throughout my childhood, where I was put in karate and I was put in kung fu and I was put in kali and I was put in these different martial arts. Not really by my own volition, but just it was part of my father's educational program of child rearing. And when I had started wrestling, which, now we understand to be a very serious martial art, I didn't even understand it was a martial art because I thought it was a sport. We're so detached from martial arts as a lived reality that even the people practicing martial arts have trouble categorizing what they are and what they aren't. So I was in the traditional martial arts. Like you go on, just walk into a mall, talk to a random person, what is martial arts? They're going to be like, it's that kid with the white little robe and he's wearing a belt, right? And you're like, that's kind of true. And that's the understanding that most people had. That's the understanding that I had. So when I started wrestling, I thought it was a sport. I didn't even realize it was really a martial art. That's when I started to have a perhaps wider lens on what martial arts were and what they weren't. So there's the two general aspects of perhaps like traditional arts and modern arts, so we could say sports. But then there's the other aspect of like inward arts and outward arts. So you look at something like Tai Chi, Qigong, these meditational practices, which are particularly strong in China. And they don't have a physical component. They're purely a philosophical meditational exercise. So there's a contrast between the inward, like completely nonviolent arts, and then the outward, very violent arts. But there's also a contrast between like the modern arts, which are very concerned about efficacy, and then the traditional arts, which through a variety of reasons, which I discuss in the book, have become sort of inept in efficacy, but they've kept a lot of the traditionalist aspects. So most people get stuck in one of those areas and that becomes their martial art trajectory. And they're comfortable with it, which is fine. And they don't get to experience the different types of martial arts to realize the contrast. And so it was through the contrast and through the different perspectives that I was able to eventually write this book and make some, what I would consider unusual observations about the martial arts. And that's what became the central thesis. So the central thesis is a chapter in the book that is the title of the book, called the Tao of War. And that is the part that I just kind of came up with. And what it is metaphysics of martial arts demonstrated in a way where if you're practicing martial arts and you're aware of striking and you're aware of grappling and you're aware of these things from an embodied reality, not just from a theoretical standpoint, but you've actually been doing them, you can view them in a lens which helps you kind of witness the sacred. It helps you see something that isn't immediately obvious, but when you have martial art knowledge, it becomes very obvious. Because the central challenge, going back to myself as an instructor, is like, how do you, in a room full of disparate personalities and minds and backgrounds, meaning like we were just in America teaching. There's one guy, he's like a pseudo-Buddhist, another guy's Muslim, another guy's atheist, another guy's, just agnostic. We're just random people mixed together, and the only thing we have in common is our training. How do you communicate to them that what you're doing is sacred without being like, well, I'm a Buddhist, therefore listen to this scripture, or I'm a Muslim, therefore it's in the Quran? So how do you explain to someone the sacred nature of something without referencing a particular tradition? You need some type of metaphysical proof or demonstrable experience where you can witness the sacred without triggering the sort of regurgitative reflex of the modern mind, which has become quite anathematized towards religion.
Right.
So therein is the book. It's like a way to teach the sacred without excluding people based on where they came from, because the things that are witnessed in martial arts are so universal. All you got to do is stick around long enough and train, and anyone can see them.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Thank you so much. I think one thing I'd take away from that is the fact that because you had so many kind of wide experiences of understanding martial arts, to some extent you were able to fuse many of them together as well in terms of your own teaching, and that definitely comes across. Can I just ask you about how, in terms of your own training and some of the people that you studied under, are there any kind of stories or instances where you were learning with certain masters that really left an imprint on you, left an experience on you?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have to accredit my understandings to not just one teacher, but to many very good teachers I've had. Some of them are, you would say, martial art teachers, and then some of them are just more like spiritual teachers. And it's because of, again, perhaps the lack of which those teachers overlap that I was able to put together something that shows a commonality where normally the commonality is not highlighted. So I wouldn't highlight a specific teacher, but it's because of the disparate parts of the education that I was able to put it together. But I was definitely blessed with good teachers, and it's like in a way that you wouldn't be able to recreate for someone else. Like the guy just happened to live in the right place, and then he meets another guy, and he just happens to live in the right place, and like these. You look back at it and you're like, well, they're not coincidences. I was meant to meet that person. I was meant to have that teacher at that time. But while you're growing up, it just seems sort of natural. Like, yes, of course, I just know this guy, and then I know that guy, and then I know that guy. But the teachers really were, of course, the key to my current understanding. And any claims that like, oh, I'm some smart person, I put this together myself, that's ridiculous. Like, that's not what it is. I just had really good teachers at the right time to help me piece together sort of a puzzle that now looking back on it, I've thought like, how come no one noticed this before? And the analogy I use to explain that is like, you don't get gender studies until you have a society of divorce, right? First, you have to take something and break it up. Then you see the parts. And modernity has that all over. Modernity is, you could say, characterized by a separation of meaning and form. And so you don't notice those things in a holistic environment when they're functioning. When something is together, the way martial arts would have been almost, forever until modernity, there would have been a spiritual component, a grappling component, a striking component, a weapon component, all put together. So you think of it in a very different way. In modernity, they got pulled all apart. And so in their parts, people were kind of existing in silos and not able to notice that they were in just one segment. But I was lucky enough to see a lot of the different segments and realize, hey, these things could not only be put back together, but the way that they're pulled apart mirrors metaphysical reality in a very like palpable way. And so that's where the book came from.
Great. Dr. Walid, I feel like you want to say something at this point. Please go ahead.
No, you just said something that really resonated with me, and I was thinking about this right when you were talking, because we've done a few other episodes. We did one about calligraphy, and I think we'll mention Futuwa in a little bit. And, my own experiences, and I studied Aikido for a little bit, and I'm currently very serious about equestrian sports. So the common threads that I was thinking about is these things that people may nowadays do kind of like you mentioned, in a commercial sense or like a hobbyist sort of sense. But I think they're underpinned by very ancient metaphysical foundations that informed not just, I don't even want to call it sport, but like the art, or let's say the discipline of, that particular discipline, whether it's martial arts, whether it's archery, whether it's futuwa or furusiya or what have you. They were all informed by that, which to me was, if you contrast that with modernity, it's kind of the making of the human being, the making of the man, as it were, rather than this kind of utilitarian approach as something to pass the time with, or then to be commercialized as a spectacle, right?
Yeah.
It becomes spectral. I don't know if the word spectralized is a word or something, but
And like you said, making of the man, even that is a problem in modernity because the definition of man changed.
Mm-hmm.
The definition of man went from, according to all wisdom traditions, a spiritual, conscious vicegerent of earth, something that was distinct from animal, distinct from, mineral, something with agency, something with morals. We don't look at animals and say he did right or wrong, but we saw that in ourselves. And when that was gone, when that was torn from, you could say, like common culture, what we experience as modernity, the definition of man became material. It became indistinguishable from atoms and from the processes of physics and gravity. It's just another thing in the endless, space of things. And when you reduce man to material things, you guarantee meaninglessness, nihilism, and narcissism, because that's all that can fruit out of a materialist philosophy. And so what we're experiencing is not just us, but like us within multiple generations of men not knowing what men are.
Mm-hmm.
We're in multiple generations of people not really understanding what the human being is. And so martial art is just one small expression of that deeper confusion of modernity where even the most simple things are not understood.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the challenges that I've seen over, let's say, the past 25 years or something, quarter century, that let's say people even involved in serious study of religion or spirituality and so forth, there is not a kind of easy segue into incorporating, the martial or more physical aspect in that. And we've had this kind of phenomenon of many people who, let's say from a, an Islamic studies perspective, who can become quite learned and quite educated in that and quite scholarly, but I always felt like there's a piece missing, because where is the applied aspect? Where is the self-discipline aspect that also extends to the physical and not just the spiritual? And, the early manuals of, let's say, tasawwuf and of ihsan tazkiyah, they did not neglect that. They did talk about this. And you found that many of the early scholars, they were, renowned horsemen or equestrians or wrestlers or whatever particular aspect. One very famous Maliki scholar I kind of take as a role model a little bit. His name was Khalil ibn Ishaq al-Jundi. So he has the most important treatise on Maliki fiqh, and his laqab, or his nickname, is al-Jundi, the soldier, because he was a soldier in the Mamluk army, and he would wear actually the soldier dress even when he was teaching his books. He was teaching like fiqh and teaching aqeedah, whatever it might be, and he has that. So, and I think if we draw a broader picture, like the crisis of masculinity, and I think Hannah and we've touched upon this several times in our discussions. I was just interested to get kind of like, how would this fit into addressing that, that particular crisis? Like you said, men don't know how to be men anymore, or how to be men with other men, or how to be men with women. It seems to, extend across a broad range of things. And I think the project that you're working on here, I think, is very instrumental in addressing that.
I would say that metaphysically, and I assume that you'd agree with me on this, metaphysically, they're the same crisis. My criticism of martial art is that martial art is supposed to be a holistic reality, and it has been torn asunder.
Mm-hmm.
And similarly, masculinity is a holistic reality, and it has been torn asunder. And as I said earlier, this is characteristic of modernity, in which meaning has been torn from form on almost every level of our existent society. You have food, and the meaning of food is nutrition, but people are eating junk food, and it has the flavor, and it has the shape and the color, and it has the texture of the food, but the meaning was the nutrition, and the nutrition is gone. It's even a poison. You have the sport perhaps of bodybuilding. You lift weights. The meaning of strength training is strength. The form of the strong person is the muscles, but the meaning was the strength. But we've torn it apart, and now they just focus on, taking drugs to puff up and look really large. But the meaning is gone. So you kept the form, you lost the meaning, and you can go through so many different facets of society and see that the separation of meaning and form is really like a strong characteristic of modernity. So when I say that it has the same metaphysical roots, the crisis of masculinity and the crisis of martial arts, I really think them to be the same in essence. And so this is where I use that terminology of yin and yang, partly because it is a reality, but it's accessible in English in a way that a lot of more theologically technical vocabulary are not so accessible to a lot of people. And it's widely understood enough that you don't need to go too deep into any particular cosmology, even though it's technically a Confucius or Taoist term. You don't really need to know that to use it in a very functional and appreciable way. And when you look at masculinity, you can see that masculinity, like the martial arts, torn asunder, got turned into sort of like a yin and a yang. You've got this tough guy culture, right? Like think of the movies. You've got Scarface. It's a movie about a drug dealer, and then these kids have like posters of this, like basically a psychopath drug dealer on the wall. You've got the murdering philanderer James Bond. He's like a hero, but he's really just a murderer. Like there's nothing virtuous about this guy. You've got The Godfather. It's a big like institution of culture, and it's just movies about mobsters. You've got Peaky Blinders. It's like the Birmingham version of Godfather. They're just gangsters. So there's a segment of masculinity in its dysfunction which got drawn into the yang and drawn into the false masculine. It's a bravado. It's what we would perhaps call toxic masculinity, which is a loaded term because of its own, intellectual baggage. But it's a toxic form of masculinity where you're trying to be extra tough and extra quote unquote manly, and it becomes apish, it becomes silly. And so that's sort of like the thug. But in opposition to that, the yin side of male dysfunction, of masculine breakdown, is like what I call the indoor cat. We have a whole generation of men where we know lattes, we know soft, sofas and high-speed internet, but we don't actually know how to like hunt or like slaughter an animal or do martial arts. We are quite comfortable. So I like an indoor cat, right? You're still a cat, but like you meow for your food, and like someone trims your nails and your coat's all clean, and you don't go outside anymore and fight the alley cats and like get roughed up. You don't know the wild. You don't know the flavor of the mouse in your teeth. And that is how I at least have come to, almost broadly categorize male dysfunction in modernity, is that there's like indoor cats and there's thugs, and really they overlap a lot. A lot of thugs, when you like break it down, you're like, you're not tough. You're actually just like an indoor cat with like different words. You dress up like a gangster that you saw on TV, that love of gangster rap, and this is something not just in America anymore. Gangster rap is now in the Punjab. They have a whole thing of like Punjabi rap, and they click the guns on the music videos, and it's all the same stuff. You can find this in many different, cultures, and that's that like thug. And then the indoor cat, it's also everywhere. You've got in Japan the phenomenon of the hikikomori. They call them hikikomori. They had to add it even to the Oxford Dictionary. They're people who are so literally indoor that they don't even go outside for years. And they have another phenomenon in Japan called the herbivore men. They're like never get married, hyper feminized men who are just super soft. So it's not just a Western phenomenon. And of course, you know this about modernity. It's not just America or, the UK or something. It is global. Everyone experiences this. And we can see it in the birth rate. The birth rate in every developed country is below replacement levels. Everyone knows this. And they try to find out the reason. And there's too many reasons to list. It's like a little bit economic. It's a little bit perhaps like testosterone. It's a little bit ideological. Like you look at feminism and red pill and like dysfunction like that. It's a little bit geographic. It's a little bit cultural. So there's too many reasons. But the fact that cultures that are so different, like Korea and Germany and Italy and Singapore, they're very different culturally. You can't say it's a cultural thing. There's something else that's transcultural that we're all suffering from. And that, in my estimation, is modernity. And that's why when you look at modernity from at least my lens, which is, more of a metaphysical lens, you will over and over find this phenomenon of like the indoor cat and the thug. And that's where masculinity is broken.
Yeah, no, brilliant. I think definitely one of the issues of modernity is that reductionist kind of tendency of just reducing things down and missing the whole. Now, I think one thing that you talk about in the book is the fact that you are trying to address what it means to be a martial artist in this age of confusion. Can you just expand on that? Because I know you touched on it a little bit right now in terms of thug and the indoor cat, but in terms of martial arts itself, what does it mean? And can you also talk a little bit about why you think the book is also seeking to sort of revive this concept of the warrior poet? Because the warrior poet, we've discussed this on several podcasts in the past. It's something that's in many traditions certainly in the East, in the Middle East as well, and also in the West. So could you maybe just touch on those two things there, the warrior poet, and also what it means to be a martial artist in this time?
Yeah, as Walid mentioned, he's mentioning a scholar who would dress himself in armor, and that is the concept of the warrior poet. So the same thing that I just described about masculinity, where there's like people that are really soft and then people that are like hard, that is the warrior poet is the synthesis of those disparate parts. That is the answer to that problem. It is the harmonization of the inward and the outward. It is someone who balances the yin and the yang, or you could say the jalal and the jamal, or you could say the stern and the gentle, or you could say, the inward and the outward. There's so many different ways to explain it, but we do understand that there are like philosophical things, and then there's like real life where you actually have to do stuff. And in the same way that masculinity was broken up into a yin and yang, martial arts got broken up into a yin and yang. And martial arts, even by that word, martial art, it's a compound term. Martial, it comes from Mars, the god of war. So it refers to war or military. And art is different. It's a very hard thing to define, but it has a reference to beauty. It has a reference to aesthetics. It has a reference to also technical skill. And we understand by that compound, that term, martial art, that there's something about it that is warlike. So that's, the yang side. And then there's something about it that is internal. And if you have just war with no intellect, that's like an animal, right? That's like, so that can't be it. It can't just be how much I can beat you up. I'm very good at beating you up, therefore I'm a martial artist. You're missing the other point. But all of the philosophy that comes with martial arts, the cosmology, understanding, if that understanding is not couched in an actual martial ability, then it becomes like a joke. Because how can you talk about martial arts and you can't actually fight? That's incoherent. So one of them is martial with no art, and one of them is art with no martial. In the same way that like one of them's an indoor cat, one of them is a thug. They're not they're both just different types of imbalance. So in one point of view, they're the same person, just on other sides of the coin, right? They're the same person, just experiencing different aspects of modernity. But the holistic warrior poet, or you could say like scholar warrior, you could use many different words to express this. It's like the holistic man the balanced human being has to have the outward and the inward in harmony. Now, you know that old saying, they say that pens are mightier than swords, okay? Everyone understands, okay, that's pretty true. But if that was literally true, why don't soldiers carry pens into battle, right? So, it's not how he meant it. Okay, so then what do we mean by that? Pens are mightier than swords. And what does it imply, right? It implies that there is something physical that needs to be done, right, to even create the space for the intellect to be able to do its philosophizing. But it's also hinting to, actually, the philosophizing is the higher level. It is the higher level. But the higher level cannot be reached without the base. So there's a bit of a paradox in there. You need one before the other one can even exist. But the other one is the higher purpose. So it's similar to the separation of meaning and form, in the sense that the form is ability to fight. If you can't actually fight, martial art is like oxymoronic as a term. But then if you just fight and you don't learn why to fight, for justice, for peace, to establish goodness, to prevent harm, etc., then you've missed the entire purpose. You'd be better off just not doing anything at all. Then it's in martial arts, it's a pretty dangerous thing to have someone with violent capacity, but no ability to understand what they're doing. And to use a recent example, we just saw this in California. We saw a shooting in San Diego, and one of the shooters was training Jiu-Jitsu at a very prominent gym. And he clearly, in my estimation, was being given the yang without the yin. It is completely inappropriate to train someone in arts of war without also training them how to control themselves, how to cultivate in themselves ethos, love, spirituality, depth, understanding. So one of them that's a clear type of toxicity, but it's hard to create a supremacy of toxicities to say that's all bad, because it's really easy. It's palpable. That's all bad. He got this, education without the inward. But the inward without outward is also a dysfunction. If we were going to use an analogy, that's like a non-Muslim Sufi. You're like, that doesn't make sense, right? That is a contradiction. How are you going to teach the ideals of something that you don't actually embody? And the embodiment is the actual ability to actually defend yourself. It can't be hypothetical. It can't be just hearsay. It has to actually be a real capacity. And with men in particular, we have a disadvantage to women. They have children and they learn compassion in a way that we don't learn it. They have children and they learn compassion in an embodied practice in a way that is cut off from men. It's just not what we do. We, as men, have to learn violence in an experienced, embodied way. Otherwise, our compassion is like undeveloped. If I can't look at people and know that I can tear them apart, when I say I'm not going to do that, it doesn't mean as much. If I don't have violent capacity, my compassion, it could be real, it can be sincere, but it's not the same as when I could put you to death, but I choose not to, like the Prophet ﷺ when he conquered Mecca. That's mercy. He had the ability, the sword over the people he conquered, then he forgave them. When you are extending forgiveness and compassion and your sword is not actually over someone's neck, what does that mean? Right? It's a word, but is it the same thing as the reality of true mercy? So for men in particular, the martial arts, when you really learn how to become physically dangerous, it gives you a window into compassion that's almost impossible to replicate. And therein is the problem of the yin side of the dysfunction, where people do traditional practices, which are good for camaraderie, they're good for exercise, they're good for a lot of things, but they don't actually learn how to fight. And there's reasons for that. It's related to, the invention of the gun and basically the lack of need. Like, we don't really need to learn how to like fight hand to hand most of the time. So that's one type of dysfunction. And then the other type of dysfunction, as mentioned, is learning how to fight and not knowing why. And it's, as I said, rooted in the same metaphysics. So you've got the yin and yang dysfunction of masculinity, and you've got the yin and yang dysfunction of martial arts, and they mirror one another.
Yeah. I think all of that is very important. But for the young men, perhaps, who are listening to the podcast and are wondering, okay, I agree and I feel what you're saying, and where do I start? What should I be doing? What should I be thinking about? Is there something remaining of whatever tradition that we're trying to hold on to that will inform us of how to move forward? I think we've located the problem, but what do particular solutions look like in your estimation?
Well, if we're looking at just statistics of men in particular, most men still don't train. So step one is, if you're not training, definitely start training.
Mm-hmm.
Most men, statistically, are not in shape. If you're not in shape, you should be in shape. Most men are not actually embodying the prerequisites to being a warrior. Forget actually, getting good at it. Just the prerequisites is like physical control, physical diet, physical fitness, staying in shape, being able to move through space. And if you're talking about, what we should specifically do once someone's stepped into martial arts, that's a large discussion, because we have, in our dysfunction of modernity, the advantage of data. Now, empiricism, of course, is not the be-all and end-all of knowledge, but we do have the advantage of cameras. And in the advantage of cameras, we've got thousands and thousands and thousands of films, sometimes just random strangers filming street fights, and of like professional fights, so we can see with a data analysis of what physical movement looks like. And even in the 1980s, we didn't have this kind of data. We did not have the type of data we have on physical movement that we have now. And so when you go to like a certain generation of martial artists, they'll laugh at themselves. Like I was saying earlier, when I started wrestling, I didn't even know it was a martial art. There's tons of people like that. Mm-hmm. Our understanding of martial arts got totally rearranged once martial arts became more of like a sport that everyone had access to. There was small traditions out there of efficacy, but it was mostly died out because we didn't need to do it. We had guns, we have bombs, we have airplanes, we have all these sophisticated tools that make the classical martial arts obsolete. And in their obsolescence, they were just sort of like done for cultural reasons or for sport reasons, and we didn't really have a clear understanding of them. Now with the basically the internet and the spreading of film, there's so much empirical data that we have really good understandings of what actually works and why. And messing that up is like movies. So if you take most men, their understanding of martial arts will come from movies. And movies are just way off, right? Like that shouldn't surprise us, but they display physical movement in a very unrealistic way. They display fighting in a very unrealistic way. And so if our cultural understanding is both informed by and reflected in the movies, that is just, it's not very helpful. But we do have access to data through cameras and just thousands and thousands and thousands of fights that we can see to see what actually works. And I would suggest to start with things that actually work. The problem with that, as I was saying in the beginning of this talk, is that a lot of the martial arts with strong efficacy, they're basically just commercial transactions. Right? So when you're talking about training, yeah, you want to know how to actually do stuff, but you have to be aware that that place is not going to give you everything you need. And so you have to, as a practitioner, find a way to compensate for that deficiency. So if you're in a traditional martial art, I do Tai Chi, I do qigong, right? That can't be all that I do. And I do those things. I didn't mean that like hypothetically. I actually do those things. I can't rely on that as a complete martial art. That gives me certain philosophical insights. It's very relaxing, etc. But I have to, on my own, recognize this is not a martial art that is for efficacy. I'm not going to get fighting in this. I'm not going to be able to defend myself with this. And so if I think it can and it can't, that's a problem. So I have to take the good from it and then go and compensate with something else. And if I'm only doing Muay Thai, it's an amazing fighting art. It's extremely effective, but it's also basically just a Roman circus. So if that's all you're doing, you have to recognize, yeah, I'm getting the outward, but I'm missing the inward. And that's where the lens of understanding martial arts in a broader way really becomes advantageous, because if you're able to navigate, okay, this is like effective, this is not effective, but this has, some value in it in this way, and this has some value in it in that way, then you can make more appropriate decisions for yourself as you're trying to navigate. But the first step for most people is just starting something, because most guys don't do anything.
Right, right. Okay. Now, one thing I think certainly from your reading from the book and your own experiences, you've had the opportunity to learn from different traditions, those in the East and the West elsewhere. What are some of the commonalities of those martial arts? And what are some of the differences that you found? And it could be physical, it could be metaphysical as well.
Well, I think a better way to approach that question is like, how do we understand martial arts? Because the way that it's commonly understood is trying to, as you suggested, look at a bunch of different traditions, and to see the essence behind them is a lot easier. And when you're talking about human touch, there is basically two types of human touch in non-weapon martial arts. You're either grappling, a synonym for that is wrestling. They mean the same thing. Or you're striking. Now, touching, obviously, you're just touching someone, and then you start to control them with that touch. That's basically what grappling means. It's leverage touch, but you're not causing damage with the touch. The touch manipulates, it controls, it redirects. Striking is about damage. To strike, the purpose of the strike, it could be a deflective strike, etc. But the essence of it is damage. And the difference between them basically is the speed. So if you touch someone, I pat you on the shoulder, you say, oh, he didn't really hit me. But if I hit you a little bit faster, a little bit faster, a little bit faster, the speed will correlate to hardness, or we'd say damage, and eventually you'll say he hit me. So somewhere between slow and fast, the essence changes. And those are the two different broad categories. That's the yin and yang of striking and grappling. The yin is the grappling. It is, and this is what the Tao of War, the book, is really about. It's about exploring the yin and yang of martial arts, and I've looked for it. I haven't found it anywhere written about it in history. And as I mentioned before, the reason it's not written about is because they used to be always mixed together. You had to mix them together. And so I came with a very strong wrestling background. When I started to, get into boxing and these other striking arts, I noticed these things from like Akbarian metaphysics. I'm like, hey, this is like Jalal and that's like Jamal. And then I looked at it from a Taoist lens and I was like, wow, it lines up perfectly. All of the attributes of the yin, you're going to find them in grappling. All of the attributes of the yang, you're going to find them in striking. But more amazing was that that's just non-weapon fighting, which itself is a yin in contrast to weapon fighting, which is the bow and the sword. In the same way that you'll find the attributes of the yin in grappling and the attributes of the yang in striking, you're going to find the attributes of the yin in the sword in contrast to the attributes of the yang in the bow. And so if you look at some of those attributes, just a few of them, like nearness. The sword, it requires nearness compared to the distance of the bow. The blade, if I just touch you really slowly, it will still cut. So compared to the speed of the yang, the speed of the bow, you would consider the sword slowness. And it's always in a contrast to what it is existing in opposition, not absolute speed, but contrastive speed, contrastive nearness. If you look at the sword, I could cut generally one person at a time. It would be a very great tool, just like grappling, for fighting one person. But if I need to fight multiple people, I need to use boxing. You have to strike them. If I'm going to fight multiple people and I have the distance, I'd rather have a bow than a sword. It's more logical. So if you look at the weapons on that spectrum of yin and to yang, where there's distance, there's speed, there's plurality on the yang, where on that spectrum is the gun? It's like way off. It's dysfunctionally yang. And it really, when you understand the metaphysics of the dyadic in terms of the sacred weapons of the bow and the sword, it explains how dysfunctional the gun really is and why it's so disruptive and why it had the ability to basically make martial arts obsolete, because we're in like an era of a metaphysically imbalanced object, which makes the sacred warrior obsolete. And what replaces him is just like a soldier, where even the flicking of the finger can create a violent force with so much leveraged violence that there's no functional purpose in becoming a warrior. And we're living through the ramifications of that object.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, we saw that really, unfortunately, pioneered in the capture of the Americas by the Europeans, right? They went there with their rifles and so on. These traditional warriors who hadn't seen this type of machinery, and you saw that also in South America and so on. So there are a lot of historical precedents there where people just couldn't understand, like, how are these guys fighting? It doesn't make any sense. Are you able to actually? I know you got some beautiful poetry in the book, Mikhail. Are you able to read anything to us? Do you have I should ask, do you have a copy in front of you of the book? Or
I do.
You know, there were that the main section of Tao of War, and you kind of just alluded to it a little bit just now in terms of the sword and the bow and the different styles of the yin and the yang. If possible, would it be okay if you could just read that particular poem, The Sword and the Bow? Or if you think there's another one more appropriate, happy for you to do that. But I was really taken by that in the context of what you've just been talking about just now.
Let's choose a different passage just because that's what I happen to have in front of me.
Yeah, sure. No,
And I like this passage because it highlights one of the, I think, beautiful paradoxes of the Jalal Jamal, the yin and the yang, and it's called the right and the left.
Yep.
So the way of the yin is the right. The grappler places the right foot at the front. Grapplers reach with the right hand, checking for nearness. The grappler needs their power as near to the opponent as possible. So leverage may be found. With leverage comes movement. With movement comes control. And the purpose of grappling is to control and pacify. The tool of the yin is the sword. The sword, too, is held with the right foot in front. The sword itself is held with the right hand. The grappler and the swordsman are one, never-changing stance. The way the grappler can deal with size and power using skill, the swordsman too can deal with size and power using skill. The way the grappler envelops his opponents, the swordsman too envelops his opponent, slashing at the branches of his tree. The way of the yang is the left. The striker places the left foot in the front. Strikers reach with the left hand, checking for distance. The striker needs their power as far from the opponent as possible. So speed may be built. With speed comes power. With power comes damage. And the purpose of striking is to damage and nullify. The tool of the yang is the bow. The bow, too, is held with the left foot in front. The bow itself is held with the left hand. The striker and the archer are one, never-changing stance. The way a striker can deal with number using power, the bowman too can deal with number, firing many arrows. The way the striker penetrates his opponents, the bowman too penetrates his opponent, piercing into the bulk of his trunk. At the level of mastery, the right and the left vanish, and only the Tao of War remains. The master of the Tao of War knows the sword, the bow, the way of striking and grappling. But even the masters have disposition. All people have the heart to one side and the liver to the other. Symmetry is not the way of mankind, nor shall it be for the warrior. So the question always remains if one is to become a striker who is grappling or a grappler who is striking. The highest answer to this riddle is yes and no. When a warrior reaches formlessness in the right and left, the opponent becomes confused, unsure of north and south. They wander lost through the land.
Brilliant, absolutely.
So this is as I described, it's highlighting that there's a symmetry in the yin and the yang, respectively, the yin of grappling and the yang of striking, and the yin of the sword and the yang of the bow. And so in at least, when you look at the patterns of the yin and the yang in the created realm, in a yin or yang, there's a yin and yang. So when you have a holistic reality, there will be two halves. There's the male and the female, but inside of the male, there's a yin and yang, and inside of the female, there's a yin and yang. So the larger idea of like martial arts has weapon and non-weapon. And inside of non-weapon, you've got striking and grappling. Inside of weapon, you've got the bow and the sword. And they line up in this absolutely beautiful symmetry of non-symmetry, where there's a symmetry that you can see just like as the sun and the moon. There's a symmetry to it, but there's an asymmetry to it because they're not about equality. That's the word of modernity. Everyone, equality. No, they're about balance. And balance is about harmonization of difference. So you look at music, you have an A, you have a C, it creates a minor third. It's beautiful. They're not the same. It's not equality. It's about balance. And it's a absolutely, to me, beautiful balance that in martial arts, as a right-handed, right-footed person, which is most people, you strike on one side and you grapple on the other. And you just can't get away from this. So it's just like the stances are just like that when you start to practice this thing. And that's why it's so important to actually embody these traditions and know them internally and not just theoretically, because when you feel it, you're like, yeah, you can't actually reverse this. And then the question comes, you're like, so what do you do? Do I fight in a wrestling stance and then just throw punches from the other side? Or do I fight in a striking stance and then grapple from the wrong side? And the answer, just like in the metaphysics of so many great traditions, is yes and no. At the highest levels of knowledge, you'll get to things that are so paradoxical. You're like, yes and no. Because it depends on what perspective, from which lens you're looking at the thing. And both are valid answers.
Yeah.
And I find that really beautiful.
Well, you have one chapter on the horse. And before I'm going to put a question to you, Mikhail, I'm just going to ask Dr. Walid, because he's an avid horse rider and he does long distance horse riding. Dr. Walid, your relationship with your horse, like how would you describe that to someone who is not a, are you bossing the horse? Is the horse bossing you? I mean, how does it work? Like, I don't horse ride, but it'd be just good to get your view. And then I want to ask Mikhail after that about this chapter on the horse.
It's a partnership. He's my partner and I'm his partner. So it has to be based upon trust and mutual tolerance, understanding. Understanding, one of the most important things is understanding how each one of us communicates. So, when you're getting the horse to go in the direction you want it to go or to speed up its gait or something like that, there's certain aids. And the better horse person you are, then the softer your aids. So if you see people, having like just goading and a whip and pushing, that means they're not communicating. The horse is not hearing the rider. But if, some people, they can just shift their position in the seat, right? Just very subtle kind of move forward a little bit or move backward. And the horse knows, okay, now it's time for me to go. Or it's time for me to stop. And even the rein work would be minimal, and to get it to go to the direction they want it to go. And some of these natural horsemen, they say, like, I just think what I want the horse to do, and he kind of understands what, where I want it to go. And so that's that kind of flow, and we've talked about flow before, right? When you're in a flow state, is achievable. And I think I've experienced it very few times, but when you're in it, right? And it's just like you don't have to say anything. You don't have to do anything. You just kind of think, and he stops, he goes, he gallops, he canters, he slows down, and so forth. So I think it's that balance, is that communication, with I think fits very much into what Mikhail is saying about the yin and the yang, and Jalal and Jamal, and we even talked about masculine, feminine, and everyone has to have kind of a good balance of that within how they're approaching. Because if you have too much of, let's say, the yang, if you're an equestrian, you wind up abusing the horse. If you have too much of, and I'm speculating here, if you have too much of the yin, and not of the yang, then you don't set proper boundaries for the horse, and then he's confused and doesn't know what you want it to do. So I think, like in any worthwhile endeavor, it's based upon balance. But I'm interested in hearing what our esteemed guest has to say about that, what his perspective is.
You said something about the lighter your inputs, like the more masterful you are.
Mm-hmm.
And that is exactly how grappling is.
Mm-hmm.
When you're really good, you're like using their energy against them. Now, a lot of people talk about this. They say, oh, I'm going to use their energy against them. Probably the best at this is judo. Judo, jiu-jitsu, wrestling. Most people can't do it. A lot of people talk about that, like using their energy. It's really hard to actually do. But that is exactly what high-level wrestlers do. Because if it's a grown man and he's really struggling and he's using his muscles, you can't usually just muscle him back, right? You're just both going to get tired, and like whatever happens. Where grappling excels is not when both people know how to grapple. Then it's a war. But when one person is a really high level grappler and the other person doesn't know what they're doing, they can feel what's going on, and with very light inputs, throw them and manipulate them. And that is, to diverge momentarily from the horse. I want to get back to it, but that is, if we were going to look at knowledge, where you have like transmitted knowledge and then you have intellectual knowledge, like I'm sure you've read the work of William Chittick, on
Mm-hmm.
that, science of the cosmos, science of the soul,
Mm-hmm.
where there's like, if you tell me that 3 + 3 is 6 because the teacher said so, I'm like, you didn't understand it, right? You don't really understand it. So there's a problem in martial arts where there's transmission knowledge, which even if the transmission is true, that's not what it is. You have to get your hands on someone and actually have them fight back with no script, where you're like, I don't know if he's going left or right. I don't know what's going to happen. Just like riding a horse, where you don't actually have foreknowledge, and there's a risk of like it could go bad because he's going buck. Your training partner could buck like a horse, and it could be kind of wild. When you learn to do it in that chaos environment, that's mastery of grappling. And the really good grapplers can make those small little inputs and completely eviscerate someone. And from a perspective of like masculine training, teaching people patience, they have to go through that. Because when you, as a neophyte, as a new wrestler, as someone, a white belt, you don't really know what you're doing, you haven't gone live with someone, you haven't sparred with them, and they've been doing it for a long time, that experience is formative. It's like, it feels like he's an octopus. You're like, what is happening? This guy's got extra limbs or something. I can't really understand what's happening. He's my size, or he's even smaller than me. And I'm everywhere I go is a trap. And he's got me again. And that feeling, you talk to any grappler, they're like, yeah, the first couple of months are brutal because you're just getting killed by everyone. Like, you can't do anything. They're just tapping you out and throwing you. And you're like, I fight back. And it's just like, the harder I fight, the worse it gets. And that feeling is so humbling and universal that it becomes sort of the bedrock of memory, where when you, after years, have some mastery, you remember what the new guy's going through. And you're like, no, just stick with it. It gets better. Don't worry. You're not doing anything wrong. It's totally normal, but it's one of the most curative practices. But something I wanted to mention about the horse is the context of horsemanship in modernity, in my estimation, has been separated from the context of the horse in a more natural time. The or as you used to say, like the prescription of horsemanship that people usually, give from a classical point of view was in context of everyone already knowing how to wrestle, because the horse is a specialist instrument of war. It's not foundational. So it's like it's amazing. If you go back, 1,000 years, it's like $100,000 object. It's crazy expensive. Wrestling's free. Wrestling is, do you have a friend? Are you 7? Okay, you're qualified. Right? And even the bow would be like that middle tier thing. In pre-modern terms, it would have been like a $5,000 to $15,000 object, depending on the level of craftsmanship. So people would generally learn grappling and then get a weapon later. And then if you're really advanced, then we would get the horse like later. It's like this high specialist thing. And we've taken it out of context and we've turned it into like, well, there's prescriptions to ride horses, and we ride horses because they're awesome. But it's like in a martial art terms, it's like going to the super, you're like, I'm going to fly the jet, but I like haven't done basic training. It's it's a really interesting thing to see how we think of horsemanship as enjoyment, right? We think of it as like a hobby, but in the pre-modern sense, it was a tool of war. And it was in a hierarchy of like soldiering or warriorhood, where you're like, okay, we'll get you on the horse, but learn how to do this first and learn how to do that first. Because if you would have went to a Mongol and knocked him off his horse, I guarantee you he knew how to wrestle. Right. And if you go to a swordsman in the pre-modern era and he drops his sword, I guarantee you he knew how to wrestle. If you do not know how to wrestle, the rest of the martial art education is like out of place. So I find it interesting. As much as I love horsemanship, it's nothing against it. I'm a massive advocate of it, and I think we should definitely bring it back. But it's expensive. It's still quite financially prohibitive for people to get access to horses. And then when we do get the blessing of having access to horses, it's like, in what context are we understanding it? Is it just to ride a horse, or is it in the context of a warrior where you're like, okay, I'm riding the horse, but now can I add a bow to this thing? Can I shoot from the horse? If I get off the horse, can I still handle myself? And so I think, and that's not something I talked about in this book, but it's something that I've been thinking about later on, because the horse, I think, has a metaphysical quality. I don't think it's just a random thing. I'd say riding animals in general have a metaphysical quality. They have a spiritual capacity to transform aspects of the human being's heart. And so they're very powerful. And I think it's valuable to contextualize what it was in terms of a war instrument, because it wasn't a camel. Camels are kind of slow. They're good for they're like transporters. It's like a big Mack truck. This thing is like a Ferrari. It's a very specialized, expensive, sensitive, high speed, high risk tool of war that requires someone to become the ultimate yin, because you have to be the ultimate yin, and with your soft power, not with your hard power, control the ultimate yang, which is a different nafs, a different ego, a sentient creature who is way stronger than you. So I think it's really beautiful. I really I hope that horsemanship comes back in like a big way. I think it would be a culturally beneficial modality of healing, and definitely we need healing.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
totally. Well, neither do I ride horses, nor do I do martial arts, but in all my novels, my characters do. So at least I can kind of like have some claim to this conversation as well. But you guys are the real deal. I just write about it, my characters.
Get a bow. Just start doing archery.
Yeah,
Just do something.
yeah.
Like we didn't create modernity. It's not our fault, right? Because I openly criticize masculinity, but I tell people like, yeah, I'm criticizing masculinity, but you're a human being. You didn't create these circumstances. Do what you can, right? It's not our fault that we're like just woke up. It's like, oh, wish I did this when I was 7, right? It's like, we didn't do this. But what we can do is just go, okay, I didn't get to have that education, but I can make sure that my kids do. I can promote it in a community, and I can do what I can. So yeah, you don't have to, learn to be a fighter at whatever age you are. I'm sure you're only 25, right? You're a very young, spry man still. But yeah, get a bow, learn archery,
Yeah, bow
right?
might be
Get
quite
a
good.
bag, learn some boxing. I always say something is better than nothing,
Indeed,
infinitely so, at least mathematically.
indeed. Yeah,
Absolutely.
no, for sure. I'll keep writing about it in my books, for sure.
Okay.
I'll keep that up. So, no, great. Well, look, we're getting to sort of the end of the show right now. Is there, Mikhail, is there anything that, you wanted to say in the context of our conversation, but you didn't have a chance to say that you'd like to kind of, some final few words before we round up?
I wouldn't say anything particular. I don't, I do look forward to what I hope to be a transformative period of martial arts, because we have a lot of the tools to create a form of martial art revival. And I think it would be a very powerful and curative modality to restore a lot of the aspects of broken masculinity. As I mentioned, I think that men have a hard time maturing without learning violence in a real way, and then learning why to control it, and actually having something in them that's like powerful to control, to create a depth of meaning to their compassion. So I think there's a lot of potential in the martial arts to have a beautiful and good impact in a lot of lives. And, I hope that my book and my efforts can be useful in that endeavor. And, God knows best what that means. But no, I don't think I missed out anything. As you mentioned when we were talking before this, the book is kind of dense, um, in the sense that, like, I cover a lot of topics because there's a lot to be said in it. And as I mentioned early on, the book that I wanted didn't exist, and so I wrote it, and that's how I intend to use it. Like, I use it as a textbook, so it's not something that'll be the easiest to read on its own without the martial art education that it was actually designed to be taught alongside. But nonetheless, I hope that it provides a benefit. And do you have any questions before we wrap it up? Things that you wanted to say that we didn't get
No,
to?
I think we covered a fair bit. I mean, Dr. Willie, anything last things through me? Because I'm going to ask Mikhail about a book recommendation as well, if he's got any books that he can recommend for our listeners. But Dr. Willie, anything from your side?
No, I think we covered a gamut of topics, but I think we saw a centralizing theme about which our podcast is basically about, right? The challenges that we face living in the modern world and the underlying philosophy of modernity that we're trying to contend with. And I think the positive side, if I may say, is that many of these traditions are not dead. I mean, they're alive. They're not easy to find or find practitioners or masters of them. But we still have master equestrians and master martial artists and master bowmen and master craftsmen and calligraphers and a lot of these things, and found within the Muslim world to a great extent. And so I think if we were thinking in terms of revival, people who are trying to do these things, I think one of the important priorities moving forward is to support them as much as we can, and if not for ourselves, for our children and our grandchildren, eventually, that they would have access to this sort of thing. And the forms of, let's say, masculinity that we find out there, and even femininity, are a big product of the way that people live. And as Mikhail was saying, we eat, but we're not really eating. We're practicing, martial arts. Some people in a commercial way, but it's not really observing the sanctity of the thing. And modern equestrian horse racing is an abuse of the animal. It's not. It's not standing by the sanctity of it. So the automat, they say that if you don't use the thing in the proper way, in the positive way that has been shown to us, you will fulfill that need in a poisonous way. So if someone's masculine yang, for example, is not fulfilled in a positive way, then they resort to this very sort of ugly sort of violence and disproportionate response to things. right? I don't want to say this about a real man. If they're confronted with some sort of situation where they have to defend, then they're only going to use as much as they need to, right? And they don't necessarily have to come with, overwhelming sort of violence that will leave the other person permanently disabled, for example. Yeah, that's not the idea, I don't think. So similarly, this all requires a mastery and discipline of self, first and foremost. And then these are tools, right? Physical manifest tools that can help us to get to that. And I think that's what we're missing. And I think even in our Islamic seminaries, and not all of them, but many of them, that aspect is not there either, right? And we get, as Mikhail was saying, the house cat version of scholarship, very theoretical and kind of not experiential. Not really sure enough. People get asked questions about things they've never experienced such a thing. They don't know what it's like for them to have a proper what we saw say concept of it, right? And if you don't have a concept of something, you can't possibly evaluate it and then make some sort of not even a legal ruling, but how to understand it and engage with it. So I think we have to, we've said it a million times already, but I'll reiterate, we got to get from behind our screens and get into real engagement, real life, real relationships, real food, real physical movement that's underpinned by the sanctity and understanding of the metaphysics, and I don't see another way. I think that's what it is, and having Mikhail I guess today on the podcast only reinforced this idea. I think that we've been talking about. So, and go ahead. Thank you so much.
And what you're saying, it reminded me of something I did want to say and I had forgotten. The name of our school and the name of, for example, the publishing company that we're forming is Applied Philosophy. And I got this from my most formative teacher. He calls his school the Applied Philosophical Arts Institute. And he's a very interesting man. But I was like, okay, Sifu, that's too many words. We're going to call it just Applied Philosophy. Because that is basically saying the inward and the outward, the yin and the yang, in a way that is directive towards what we're trying to do. We're trying to have deep thoughts and think through what needs to be done. But if you don't apply it, then your philosophy is like just philosophizing. And so it's a very simple way to express what we're doing. We are trying to apply philosophy. And martial arts should be applied philosophy. Cooking should be applied philosophy. Calligraphy should be applied philosophy. Horsemanship should be applied philosophy, right? Life should be applied philosophy. And so I think it's a useful term to summarize perhaps what the book represents and what martial arts could and should be, and what a lot of different disciplines should be understood as not just things you do and not just things you talk about, but applied philosophies.
Great. Thank you so much. And a book recommendation, Mikhail?
I mean, man, there's a lot of books out there. I mean, I think...
Just give us one.
I have another book that you might like called The Axiology of Warriors. Have you read that yet?
No, I haven't read that.
Okay, I'll try to get you a copy, but
I'll find it.
I think you'll like it. And I won't give away what it's about, but
okay.
I have written a couple of
Axiology of Warriors. Okay.
Yeah, I think you'd like it.
Okay.
I think you'd like it quite a lot.
All right. Great. Thank you so much. And Dr. Willie, do you have a book recommendation for this week?
I would say the Fath ar-Rabbani of Sayyid al-Jilani, or the Sublime Revelation. Why I mention this in this regard? Some people, when Mikhail was talking about, if you're a novice and you get into grappling and then you're like, oh, I'm out of my element and overwhelmed and so forth. When you go into this particular book, you may feel that way at the beginning, because the Sheikh is kind of very straightforward, and I would say he takes a disciplinary approach. And these were sets of lectures that he did, and people wrote them out. He didn't actually write the book. But you can see his style. But he would get thousands and thousands and thousands of people who would come, and many people, recommitted themselves to Islam or became Muslim by his hands. And I think that's kind of a little bit more of a active, forceful aspect. Sometimes I think it's important, but at the same time, he's a very compassionate and merciful individual, and helped many people and for generations to come. So I think it's it's a must read for anybody who's interested in that, inshallah.
Great, great. And I think I'd give my recommendation as, I don't know if you read this, Mikhail, Legends of the Condor Heroes by Jin Yong. So Jin Yong is basically the Tolkien of the Chinese world. And these books have sold something like 400 million copies. So Legends of the Condor Heroes, it's set in around 1200 AD. And the Song Empire is sort of at war with the Jing Empire, and that's at war with the Mongols and so on. And this main character, Gao Jing, he is he's like a very kind of simpleton, but because he's such a nice character, he ends up all the leading martial arts masters of the time. They all end up teaching him, and he didn't necessarily ask them to teach him. But because he's such a nice, helpful person, they said, look, I want to give you some knowledge. And they teach him. And all their other students of the other martial artists, they're always competing with each other. But Gao Jing basically goes around, accidentally learns from all of the greatest masters and becomes the greatest martial artist of all time. It's a beautiful story. And it's just like someone who just mixes all the different forms. And what I'd like, and I think you'd like this if you haven't read it, is that the main masters in the book all before they fight physically, they fight with their musical weapons. So someone plays the flute, someone plays a different instrument, and so first what they do is they fight each other out through their instruments. And when they realize that okay, we're about equal, sometimes they choose not to fight because they think, well, this is not going to end well. And so it's a beautiful book, and there's a whole massive cast list of colorful characters, from the different traditions and the five greats, and they have. Anyway, I think you'd love it. So anyone who hasn't read it, it's called Legend.
I have a flute right here. We could have a flute battle.
We could have a flute battle. Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
exactly.
I have a flute right at hand. I'm ready to go. That sounds like a great book.
Legends of the Condor Heroes, Jin Yong. It's a series of 4 books. And I say it's been serialized into film in China many times. That would be my recommendation. Great. So thank you to our special guest, Mikhail Abdul-Latif. Thank you so much. Thank you to Dr. Waleed, as always.
My pleasure.
Thank you to our listeners for tuning in. And we look forward to being with you again on the next show. So peace be upon you.